The Space Force is asking for $30 billion to buy rocket launches, and the Pentagon says the military satellite launch appetite is only growing. The United States Space Force just announced it is seeking to spend up to $30 billion on rocket launches through its National Security Space Launch Program. That is a massive expansion. The Pentagon has signaled rising demand for military satellite launches, and the current contract ceiling simply cannot keep up. The Space Force originally estimated the Lane 1 portion of the program would cost $5.6 billion to cover about 30 task orders over 5 years. That number has been more than tripled to $17 billion. Lane 2 was capped at $13.7 billion last year to cover roughly 54 launches projected through 2029. But the Pentagon told Space Systems Command in April that there are 25 additional Lane 2 missions on top of the original 54. The math is just not adding up at the old price tag. To understand why this matters, you need to understand the NSSL program itself. It is split into 2 lanes. Lane 1 covers the Space Force more risk-tolerant missions. Think medium-lift launches with experimental payloads or rideshare missions carrying satellites for the Pentagon surveillance or data relay constellations. Lane 1 is open to commercial launch providers without requiring extensive certification and oversight from the Space Force. Lane 2 is where the money is. It includes the government's largest and most expensive spy satellites and radiation-hardened communications satellites designed to survive a nuclear war. Only SpaceX Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy and United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket are certified for Lane 2 missions. The roster of qualified launch companies has grown significantly. Space Systems Command originally selected SpaceX, United Launch Alliance, and Blue Origin for Lane 1 in Phase 3 back in 2024. Since then, Rocket Lab, Stoke Space, Relativity Space, and Impulse Space have all been added to the competition. The Space Force issues a request for bids on a number of Lane 1 missions each year, and then doles out individual fixed-price task orders to the winners. SpaceX has won the lion's share of Lane 1 task orders to date, but Blue Origin won its first Lane 1 task order earlier this year, which is a notable shift in the competitive landscape. The Lane 2 expansion is where the real scale of this contract comes into focus. The original Lane 2 cap of $13.7 billion was set to cover an estimated 54 launches, projected for procurement through 2029. But in April, Space Systems Command identified 25 additional Lane 2 missions on top of those 54. That is nearly half again as many high-priority strategic missions to launch. And here is the catch. Only 3 rockets are certified for Lane 2. SpaceX Falcon 9, SpaceX Falcon Heavy, and United Launch Alliance Vulcan. That means all those extra missions are competing for launch slots on just 3 certified vehicles, which puts enormous pressure on both companies. One commenter on Reddit wondered where all these additional satellites are coming from. The answer is a mix of the usual defense aerospace giants and an expanding ecosystem of smaller contractors. For the big guys, it is mostly Lockheed Martin building the large GPS and missile warning satellites from the Lane 2 bucket. Boeing, Northrop Grumman and Raytheon are also major players. Then there are lots of small contractors for small parts like sensors and communications equipment. The Boeing question is worth asking. After the Starliner saga where engineers were moved to other divisions, can we trust the Boeing Space Division? One commenter noted that unironically some of the engineers who were supposed to work on Starliner might actually be working right now on those national security satellites. But Boeing has other issues too. The WGS-11 Plus payload is delayed by more than 2 years, though it is hard to tell if that is the usual space is hard delay or general Boeing ineptitude. The cost of space infrastructure is a perennial puzzle. As one commenter pointed out, the book handled it better than the movie when Carl Sagan correctly explained that custom tooling is expensive, but making multiples of each part is relatively cheap. So they made 3 of each part to avoid retooling costs. The movie pretended making 2 of each part doubles the cost as though tooling is free. In the real world, the original manufacturer and tooling for old parts is often long gone. You have to design a new one to match, get that certified airworthy, and set up $100,000 or more of tooling to make just 20 knobs. But there is a silver lining. Several commenters noted that today 3D printing is allowing engineers to eliminate the tooling for many components, potentially saving a lot of money on replacement parts and custom hardware. So what does this mean in the big picture? The Space Force is clearly preparing for a much larger military space presence than anyone anticipated. $30 billion in launch contracts is not a small number. It signals that the Pentagon expects many more satellites, many more launches, and many more missions in the years ahead. The expansion of Lane 1 to include newer companies like Rocket Lab and Stoke Space and Relativity Space shows a deliberate strategy to broaden the supply chain. But Lane 2 remains tightly controlled with only 3 certified rockets for the most critical missions. This creates both opportunity and risk. Opportunity for the companies that win those contracts, and risk because everything hinges on SpaceX and ULA delivering on schedule with their certified vehicles. The $30 billion number is just the beginning of what may become a much larger shift in how the United States projects power from space. The Reddit community reaction to this news was a mix of fascination and healthy skepticism. One commenter summed up the sentiment with a classic economics joke: "Why build one when you can build 2 for twice the price?" Another brought up the old Star Trek book versus movie line about custom tooling costs and how the real answer is far more nuanced than Hollywood suggests. There was genuine concern about Boeing after the Starliner saga, with commenters pointing out that the WGS-11 plus delay makes it hard to judge whether Boeing or United Launch Alliance is at fault. And there was optimism about emerging technologies, with several people noting that 3D printing could be a game changer for reducing the cost of legacy part replacements in the aerospace supply chain. Here is what you need to take away from this story. The Space Force is preparing for a dramatically larger military space operation, and rocket launches are the bottleneck. The $30 billion number represents a fundamental shift in how much the United States is willing to spend to maintain its space dominance. The Lane 2 certification bottleneck with only 3 rockets means SpaceX and ULA hold enormous leverage, and the expanding Lane 1 ecosystem with newer companies like Rocket Lab and Stoke Space suggests the Pentagon is trying to build redundancy into the system. This is one of those stories that shows how fast military space is growing and how expensive it is to keep up. Thanks for watching Orbit Reports. If you found this breakdown useful, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the space industry. That is the story of the Space Force's $30 billion rocket launch bet. We covered the contract structure, the launch providers, the satellite builders, and what this means for the future of military space. If you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe to Orbit Reports and hit the bell. We will see you in the next one.